Good evening, YouTube. Hope everyone is well. Welcome to another music YouTube and Facebook Live with me, Jim Huswit of LARP Music. I'm coming to this a little bit unprepared this evening. Monday, I was like ready half an hour before. I had notes, etc., etc. Whereas today, I've kind of got a little bit complacent. But yes, anyway, welcome for anyone who's just joining. The subject of today's discussion or broadcast is music production. It's a huge area, but I just wanted to share 5 tips and sort of tricks or things that I've learned over the past sort of 13 years, and pick the 5 which I feel have kind of helped me level up in a big way, and it's sort of like been a kind of an epiphany that helped me get level up my music, and hopefully that you can use them to do the same with your music. Before I go in, if you're new to the channel, please do feel free to hit the subscribe and button and ring the bell. That means that next time I post a vid, you're the first to find out. Joy. Yes, also for those, there's a fly in the studio. That's gonna annoy me. Yes, for any of you who are interested, there'll be a link in the description below, but I have a free webinar on production music, because this channel is kind of generally about producing music, composing music, but with a kind of a focus on production music and the kind of passive income associated with that, because I feel like it's a really good way to generate income from your music. So if you're interested in that, there is a link to a webinar, a free webinar that I did, which you can check out. And there's also, if you're interested in doing production music, there's a link to an opportunity to write for a library which I work with in the US, called Audio Socket. It's ASX, which is the exclusive arm of that library. And if you're interested in getting your tracks sort of pitched on the front line to companies like HBO and Disney, there's a link in the description below, so feel free to tap that. So that's my spiel out of the way. Let's dive straight in. This is very much an interactive. If you have, in fact, I've got a prepared banner. If you've got any particular production tips, tricks, hacks, things that you've learned that you could share, then please do. It's very much an interactive, so leave me a comment in the comment section. Similarly, feel free to drop a comment or question, and I will do my best to answer it. First item on the agenda, if I can find my sheet. Yes, I think the number one thing that has helped me in generally my kind of composing and producing journey is breaking down the process of making a piece of music into 3 distinct sections. Writing, number 1, producing, number 2, and mixing, number 3. I think by trying to sort of concentrate and do all 3 at the same time, which we invariably do, it means that your attention is spread across 3 different disciplines. Whereas actually, if you can break it down into its component parts and focus on one particular discipline, I think that stands you in really good stead for learning quicker and making sort of a bigger sort of greater steps in terms of progress. The writing, so I'm sure you've all been there. You've been down the rabbit hole whereby you start writing a piece of music, and then you start messing around with sounds and getting bogged down with synths, and you sort of go down this sort of rabbit hole of sort of getting involved with all of the production, and you get to the end of the day and you've only got like 8 bars of music. I personally think that if you can flesh out your arrangement before you go down that rabbit hole, before you start getting really anal about your kick sounds, before you start getting really sort of like pernickety about the synth and the movement in the synth or whatever, I think if you can flesh out your arrangement, you're making life easier for yourself, because bang, you've got your arrangement. But I think also then sometimes that arrangement will actually inform the production decisions. So, rather than, and also the problem you've got is if you spend like a day working on 8 bars of music, when it comes to fleshing out the arrangement, you've got like 100 tracks to start moving around and building the arrangement with, and it just becomes, I personally find it like a bit of a head. So I am a massive proponent of limit yourself to the number of instruments that you're using, and flesh out your arrangement before you start piling in and getting all these kind of crazy sounds and what have you. Yes, I think from a production point of view, sometimes defining your sound palette at the beginning is an important part. So if you're going for a particular sound, then it's the instrument choice that you're using which will define that. But just limit those instruments and do the arrangement first. Get your sort of 2 to 3 minute piece of music, however long it is. I'm talking about production music. Normally we're talking 2 to 3 minutes. Get that arrangement fleshed out. Then once you've got it fleshed out, then as a separate process on a different day, or same day, doesn't matter, go in heavy on the production, and sort of in terms of stylistically what's happening, and sort of very much sort of creative choices. So that is about my number one hack, so to speak. It's not a hack, it's just a how I feel things sort of work well for me. If you have had any experience with that, or if you've ever been down that kind of rabbit hole where you spend hours and hours producing stuff, then let me know in the comments, because it's always nice to know that I'm not alone in the insanity of heading down that rabbit hole. The next element on my list is I've written reversing shit. I think reversing, I mean specifically, the classic thing is reversing cymbals. It might sound very obvious, but I don't think in the last 10 years I have written a piece of music that hasn't had any number of reversed cymbals in it. Because basically, when you're coming out of a section or going into a new section, that rise, and you can get plugins now which actually do it for you, like things like Gravity and Massive, they have risers in them. But by reversing a cymbal, you're doing that same thing. You're basically something with attack, which and a sort of a long sustain. When you reverse that, you've got this, and what you've got is that abrupt ending. And when that abrupt ending comes in, and when the downbeat of the next part of the music, boom, it just gives you a kind of real sense of tension. And obviously when you're writing music and producing music, particularly production music, which is to be synced with sort of TV and film, it's all about creating tension. So reversing cymbals, or I've put reversing shit, reversing cymbals is a big one, but you can do it with any instrument, like even a single piano note, a guitar note, anything with a sort of like sharp attack and a sort of long sustain. But reversing things like that is a really great way to add tension. But also as well, just within a piece of music, in terms of textures, when you reverse stuff, you kind of get some interesting textures out of it. So it's a really useful creative tool. And I always think as well, if when I'm writing stuff for production music libraries, if I put some reversed elements in there, it quite often gives it a term, it gives it an edgy sound. Edgy is a term that I hate when it comes to music because it's just kind of meaningless, but I think people like reverse stuff because it sounds a bit edgy and cool and futuristic or whatever. So yeah, reversing things is a big game changer for me, in terms of when I sort of got my head around reversing stuff. And as I say, since I learned that, I have not produced a piece of music that doesn't have several reversed cymbals or elements or risers in it. So yeah, got a comment from Ollie Barton, regular on the show. Reverse cymbals are great, solid and easy hack for sick transitions. Yeah, totally. You get a lot of that sort of stuff. Even white noise risers, it's that same sort of thing. You get a lot of that in EDM, but it works across the board in any. Even like I'm working on a lot of trailer music at the moment, and you get loads of that in there. Yeah, so if you've got any particular sort of hacks, tips, tricks that you've got, then let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Or if you're also a proponent and you use cymbals all the time, then give me a thumbs up, let me know. The third element on my list is layering. Layering, I think, is like critical to creating a big sound. And I think for many people, it is the difference between stuff that you hear like being commercially released or like broadcast quality music that you'll hear on TV versus people who, or myself when I was starting out. Quite often my sounds, my productions would sound a bit thin and weedy, and I think it's because of layering. What do I mean by this? So I did a video actually years ago on the subject of, I had a mandolin just playing a lead line, do 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 do, and it sounded great. It was in the mix. It was all really nice. However, by layering up a ukulele, no, not a ukulele, ukulele, layering up a ukulele underneath it and panning it off slightly, it kind of brought that lead line to life in a way that it's not that the mandolin didn't sound good, but it's just that layering the ukulele underneath made it sound a little bit better. And if I'm to relate this to kind of trailer music, which is something that I'm doing quite a lot of at the moment, imagine you're sort of you're creating an piece of orchestral music, and you've got some sort of big toms in there, and your toms are sort of doing their thing. That's great. Your toms are there; they're doing what they need to do. However, making those toms bigger and filling out the mix is all about layering them. So whilst you've got your toms, and that might be the kind of the main sound that you want, it's the toms that we want to hear. But then you layer in some bass drums underneath them. Obviously, wherever there's sort of like any kind of frequency overlap, we're going to try and EQ that so that they don't sort of end up turning into a mush. But you've got your toms, then underneath you've got some sort of like low drums. Underneath those, we've got some subs, some like really sort of heavy subs, and even on top of those toms we might have some sort of higher toms. We might then also have some snares, we might also have some metals and some brushes and things like that. So you're basically stacking this frequency spectrum. So at any given time in a lot of trailer music, if you had one hit of a drum, you would see your EQ curve like completely like that. It would fill up the whole frequency spectrum. But by layering sounds, it obviously you need to do this carefully, because obviously you don't want to be layering lots of sounds with the same frequency. But by layering it up, you give a real sense of size to the mix, because you're adding extra frequencies in. Now it might be that those kick drums or the subtoms, sub frequencies, we can't really hear them because the dominant sound is the tom, but we feel them, and certainly across the stereo spectrum. So this idea of layering sounds upon each, I mean, that's an extreme example, but think of it from an orchestral point of view. It's like you'll have your violins 1 and 2 doing their thing, but quite often underneath that you'll have your woodwinds and your flutes doing the same thing. Now, so quite often we can't really hear them because they're got a much softer timbre and tone, but they're there and they're playing a role and providing texture. So this idea of layering stuff, whether you're doing pop music or orchestral music or whatever that music is, layering sounds and layering textures is an amazing way to really fill out the production. And also obviously then in mix terms, you're not trying to do as much in the mix as you might otherwise, because you've already sort of filled out these areas of the frequency spectrum. So yeah, that's my third one, layering. I'm just going to have a breather. I forgot my water. This is what happens when you don't prepare for a live. Let me just have a quick look at the question. What we got here we go. Master 666110 saying, when adding in new instruments or sounds, I often add a reversed reverb tail of that instrument so its introduction doesn't sound out of the blue. Yeah, brilliant one. Anything with a reverb tail, like even a vocal, you can have a vocal line kicking off with a reverb tail of that vocal coming into it, and that sounds great. Thanks for that, Master 666110, or Psy, I believe. Ollie's agreeing with you there, mate. Likewise, foreshadows the instrument and removes any abruptness. Subliminal, what have we got here? Master 666 again. I'm just going to call you Master if that's all right. Can tell from Leeds because I don't say Master. Subliminal message like Ivan et Niosh from Simpsons. Whoa. I've missed that reference. I wish I did, because I thought I knew the Simpsons, but clearly not. Proud to say you get the reference. That means you're both bigger Simpsons fans than me. Please clarify that in the comments, because I want to know what I'm missing out on there. Okay, cool. The fourth element in production, which has sort of been a bit of a game changer, and to be honest, this has been, I think I've been exploring this more than ever in the last sort of year to 2 years, is delays. Delays are always one of those things that sort of scared me a bit, because you've got loads of settings and I sort of didn't really know what they were doing, and I sort of like use sort of specific presets. And outside of that, I didn't really take the time to delve into delays and what they're actually doing. But since I've done that, like, delays are incredible, because certainly from a rhythmic point of view, you can get some amazing rhythmic textures out of a delay. You can add some huge stereo width to anything from strings to a vocal by having a stereo delay bouncing around. And then stacking delays on top of each other can give you like a really sort of washy sound. Actually, one thing I will say is, if you haven't got Valhalla Shimmer, I don't think there's many people out there that don't have Valhalla Shimmer, but that's a classic example of, is it a reverb, is it a delay? It's probably a bit of both, isn't it? It's delays and reverbs, but it's just amazing for getting these big sort of washy pads. And it's something that you can kind of do by sort of stacking delays, but if you've got a plugin that does it all, why not use that? It's kind of like, it's just delays, but it's diffused across the space. So yeah, delays from a rhythmical point of view, from adding stereo width, and just sort of adding sort of, even on a vocal, a classic example is when you've got a vocal, if you want a nice upfront vocal, tendency is when you add reverb, it pushes it back in the mix, whereas if you put a delay on it, you give it a sense of space while keeping it like nice up front and present. So delays, definitely, if you are like I was and you're sort of a bit intimidated by them and you kind of like, oh yeah, whatever, spend a bit of time just messing around with delays in your productions, because I think it can just add. It's a great creative tool, and after all, we're kind of looking for ways to sort of get creative and do stuff out, a bit different. Um, and so number 5, I'm not going to lie to you. I set the name of this video before I actually had the content ready. I only had 4 production tips, which I love. 5 was me on the fly just before I went live here, sort of thinking of something. It's relevant, and I will share it with you. But if you have sort of like something that you think is a better number 5, then let me know in the comments. But so this ties in. So the video that I did yesterday, I talked about ignore overly prescriptive YouTube videos. Because sometimes you learn something or something's implied and then that actually holds you back. And this is a classic example for me. So if you've watched mixed tutorials, mixed tutorials always going about, oh, you should always put your reverbs on a bus. Yes and no. It depends. If I'm getting crazy with a sound and I'm doing some sound design or a specific instrument, I think there is always, and there is, it's not even think, I often will put a reverb on that specific instrument, not on a bus. Why is because I can just I can actually control the wetness 100%. So rather than bussing a certain amount of the wetness to a reverb unit, everything's coming through the reverb unit. So I can actually use that reverb unit to shape the sound in a way that I couldn't if I was bussing it. And classic, there's some great stuff, with the spring reverb and things like that. You can get some great sort of mangling sounds out of a reverb unit. But for years, I never ever put reverb on an instrument. I always did it by bus, and I feel that there are huge limitations in that. Yes, from a mix perspective, if you're putting everything into a similar space, yeah, you're going to be bussing. You don't want the sort of same reverb plugin across 100 tracks. But from a sound design point of view, from creative effects and getting your sound as you want it, you can put your reverb on the bus. And as I say, like, it's something I didn't do for years, and it's just because I watched the video and someone said that you shouldn't do it. So I was sort of doing this in terms of best practice, but actually it's nonsense. There are no rules when it comes to producing. Certainly mixing, there are really, but producing, there's no rules. If you can get some crazy sounds out of doing whatever you want, then do it. So yeah, reverb on the bus. Anyone... join the Navy. What? Oh, I'm missing out, man. Yes, so please do let me know if you've got any little reverb tips and tricks, or not reverb, production tips and tricks that you'd like to share. I would be very interested to sort of hear them. But there we go. I will just recap for you. So production tip number 1 that helped me out massively is breaking down the process of writing, producing and mixing into 3 distinct processes. By focusing on each process individually, you're putting all your energy and focus into that process rather than spreading yourself too thin across 3 different disciplines at the same time. And if anyone saw the video that I did yesterday about mixing, I'm a huge advocate of, when it comes to mixing, exporting everything out of your project as audio, creating a new project and starting from scratch. When you're starting out, if you're trying to get your head around mixing, I think that is a much better way to go than trying to mix as you go, if that makes sense. Second point was reversing, which is just the idea of, like, I talked about transitions and reversing cymbals and or sort of any kind of instrument. But again, like you get some really nice textures out of reversing stuff. So that's and as I say, I haven't produced a track for years. It doesn't have a reversed cymbal in, or 2 or 10 in it. Layering, in terms of creating sounds which fill out the frequency spectrum, particularly with a minimalist track as well. If you've got lots of the frequency spectrum taken out, you can get away with a minimalist track, but it still feels big. So yeah, layering up different sounds and getting those textures like nicely balanced. Delays, having fun with the kind of like the rhythmic stuff that you can get out of a delay, and sort of stacking delays and getting washy sounds, and also using stereo delays to bring sort of like big stereo width to anything from vocals to even strings. And then finally reverb, but putting on the bus. Again, this is born out of the fact that I hadn't thought of a 5 and had to rush to think to one. I think it's valid because it's something that is, for years I wasn't doing it, and I'm a fool for it. So it's also great in terms of if you've got a reverb actually on your track, for pushing that track back in a way that you perhaps couldn't do if you were bussing it. So there you go. Now, there was a couple of questions I had through. I think it was Olivia. Sorry, Olivia, if it wasn't you. But I asked my my sort of mail list and subscriber list for questions of what questions that they had, and one question was that I think Olivia was sort of writing library music and doing predominantly Americana, but she was asking about branching out into different genres, which and how to do so. So I think if you it's fine to do so. I years ago I went to like a panel show. The Production Music Library Awards had a sort of thing during the day before the event with panel shows, and I asked one of the composers there whether I should be sort of writing lots of different genres or focus in. He said to me, definitely do loads of different genres because it means there's a bigger pool of work. However, I totally disagree with that. I think you are much better sort of like niching down and getting really good at doing a few things rather than trying to spread yourself across every single musical genre there is. So for you, Olivia, who's sort of primarily doing Americana, I'm assuming if you're doing Americana, you're a guitarist. If you want to get into different sort of genres, then obviously go for something which is a natural progression, like folk music would be. Anything sort of guitar based, like happy clappy acoustic ukulele types of things. It's definitely worth diversifying and playing, but I think at the same time playing to your strengths. So yeah, by all means diversify, do different genres, but unless you are massively into Japanese cyber death disco, then don't start trying to get into that, because it's probably sort of hiding to nothing. By the way, give me the thumbs up or say in the comments if you're a big fan of Japanese cyber death disco. I know a lot of people are. So yeah. And another question somebody asked, Tasmin, I think. Sorry if I've got your name wrong. Was asking about how to sort of how to start in producing music if you don't play any instruments. So I don't think that's an issue. I think there's loads of people out there who don't play musical instruments, particularly like when you look at sort of like the EDM community and places like that, you're very much relying on programming with either a keyboard or sometimes even with a mouse. However, I do think there is massive merit in learning a musical instrument in terms of learning what's happening musically and harmonically can only be a good thing when you're doing music. Believe it or not, I managed to release 2 EPs and an album without having a single idea what key I was in or even what chords I was playing. So across those, there was like maybe 25 songs and I had no idea because I never wrote music like that. Obviously, that has now changed, but the ability to be able to know what key you're working in and to know what works harmonically and melodically is important. So I would say if you're getting into music production, you don't need to know an instrument. There's lots of ways to do it without. But if you are and you want to learn an instrument, I would highly recommend the piano, because that's where you do a lot of programming. You can use a sort of MIDI keyboard to do programming, but also what a piano does, so I'm a guitarist, and as a guitarist you learn chords by shapes. They're just shapes, and I don't know any notes. I know the sort of the bottom 3 strings. I can tell you roughly what notes you're on and what chords I'm playing now, but when it gets sort of higher up the fretboard, I've got no idea what the notes are. Whereas on a piano, it's very visual. You can see what's going on, you know what the notes are, but also with a piano it's really easy to change notes. With a guitar shape, you've got, with a guitar chord you've got particular shapes, and it's really difficult sometimes to sort of change the bass note or do suspended chords and things like that. With a piano it's dead easy. You just literally move a finger left or right, or you can change the bass note. So my personal take on it, and I think my writing has got much better since I sort of got this piano and spent time playing this. So I would definitely recommend a piano, but you don't need one. You don't need to be able to play a musical instrument, because as I say, if you can program and you've got a little bit of an ear. But if you're going to sort of get into it seriously, I would say get yourself a small MIDI keyboard and just learn your way around that so that you can program in simple elements and just have a play around with it, because it's been a bit of a game changer for me. Cool. Well, I think that's addressed all the questions. Let's just have a quick look. Ollie Barton's asking, where do I stand on Exciter plugins? I stand excitedly on Exciter plugins, Ollie Barton, because, yeah, why not? Exciter is distortion, as I mentioned in the mix video yesterday, but great ways to sort of bring out certain frequencies without going to an EQ. Great way to add character to a sound. And as I say, psychologically, I think human beings, we're predisposed to sort of enjoying those slight imperfections. So I stand very heavily in an excited way on Exciter plugins. Okay, Master, Sai, what's the best way of sending audio to clients? It depends. Usually a link. Well, it depends. I mean, yeah. No, yeah. So if I'm sending stuff to a music production library, I will send them usually a Dropbox link, so they have the option to stream. However, I would generally hope that they download it, because when you stream over Dropbox, it compresses the audio and it's not as good. But one thing I would also say on that subject, which I mentioned in yesterday's video, Sai, is always put a limiter on your track and get it as loud as possible without without any degradation to the audio, because I think some people do limit to the at the expense of the track and dynamics. But you want your tracks to be as loud as the other tracks, because if they're not, automatically people just make the assumption that it's not as good. I mentioned a case where I had a client, I sent them the mix for the track, they didn't like it. I suddenly realized I'd not put the limiter on it. I put the limiter on it, sent it back, and he goes, yeah, great, I've loved it, you've solved all of my issues. And all I did was put a limiter on it. So yeah, really important to limit it. But you've got to think generally people don't want MP3s, and certainly don't want WAVs attached to emails, because you don't want that kind of like those size files clogging up your email inbox. So I'd always send a link, but it's also it's also a question of what kind of link is less likely to what link is most likely to provide a high quality audio, because people aren't immune to the fact that if a track has been compressed, that it won't sound as good as it would if it was sort of like full audio quality. But also send WAVs. I don't think MP3s. I think even as experienced as producers at labels and publishing houses are, they're not immune to the sort of simple human psychology elements of, if something is compressed and isn't as loud, they might be predisposed to going, yeah, it's not very good. So you've got to make sure everything's working in your favor. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on that. Cool. Okay, guys. Well, if you've got any other questions that you'd like me to answer, or if you'd like to throw anything else into the mix, then do let me know in the comments. Failing that, as I did mention, if you are interested in kind of production music, it's something that I kind of work, pretty much do full time these days. There is a free webinar which I will link to in the description below on YouTube, on Facebook. I'll post it in the comments. And also, if you are interested in writing production music and joining a team of production music writers, I work with a company called ASX in the US, and we are constantly on the lookout for talented young writers. So if you're interested in getting involved with that and would like to submit, again, there'll be a link in the description below where you can find out how to submit to that. Yeah, thanks very much for listening. Oh, also what I will say is, if you do have any sort of general questions that I've not answered, or that you would like me to answer, or you'd like to bring to my attention, I'm basically doing these YouTube lives every day at 6 p.m. for the rest of this week and all of next week, and then thereafter I will see where we go. But if there's any burning questions that you've got regarding music production, music mixing, music writing, PR, marketing, just generally handling the day-to-day challenges of being a sort of freelance composer, even the business side of stuff, then either send me an email, library@larpmusic.com. Let me know in the comments of this or any of the videos after they've gone live, yeah, I will definitely address those issues as I can. Thanks very much for tuning in, and I'll see you same time, same place tomorrow, 6 p.m. YouTube and Facebook. But for now,